Today, we reveal 14 old Hollywood legends who were caught cheating, exposing the scandals that rocked the golden age of cinema. Behind the glamour, elegance, and polished studio PR machines, many of Hollywood's biggest stars were hiding messy love lives filled with betrayal, secret affairs, and broken hearts. From passionate flings on movie sets to affairs that ended marriages and ignited public outrage, these stories remind us that even silver screen icons had very real and very dramatic private lives. Get ready to see a side of old Hollywood that the studios tried to keep hidden. Clark Gable. The king had a crown, but his heart was always elsewhere. Clark Gable was the undisputed king of Hollywood, rugged, charming, effortlessly masculine. But behind the polished tuxedo and trademark grin was a man whose personal life never quite matched the on-screen nobility he projected. Gable's love life was a labyrinth of broken promises and whispered betrayals, hidden beneath the sparkle of old Hollywood's carefully constructed image. Though his marriage to actress Carole Lombard was widely seen as a fairy tale romance, their love story was not without shadows. Before Lombard, Gable's affairs were an open secret. Actresses, socialites, and studio assistants, Gable drifted between relationships like a man who feared standing still. One of the most persistent rumors involved actress Loretta Young, with whom he reportedly shared more than just a brief affair. Their secret child, born out of the public eye and raised in quiet mystery, became one of Hollywood's worst-kept secrets, carefully veiled in denials and silence for decades. Despite the romance he shared with Lombard, Gable struggled with fidelity. The demands of fame, long filming schedules, and a wandering heart created cracks even love couldn't seal. Lombard, with her wit and fire, is said to have tolerated more than most would, hoping their bond would outlast the temptations of stardom. When tragedy struck and Lombard's life was cut short, Gable was devastated, a grief that some say carried a burden of guilt. While the public saw a mourning widower, some insiders whispered that the weight of his choices lingered behind his sorrow. Clark Gable may have been Hollywood royalty, but his love life was far from regal. In the shadows of his silver screen triumphs, his heart was a restless traveler, searching but never staying, even when he'd already found the queen. Spencer Tracy, the devoted husband who was never really home. Spencer Tracy had the kind of face that told a story before he even spoke, weary, wise, and unmistakably human. To audiences, he was the everyman with quiet strength, the dependable anchor in countless classic films. But at home, his personal life was a tangle of contradictions. A deeply Catholic man who never divorced his wife, yet carried on a decades-long affair with one of Hollywood's most iconic actresses. Tracy married Louise Treadwell in 1923, and by all appearances, remained a committed husband, at least in name. But the reality was far more complicated. As his career soared, the emotional distance between Spencer and Louise widened. Their son was born deaf, and while Louise poured herself into advocacy and education for children with hearing loss, Spencer turned to work, and eventually to other women. Enter Katharine Hepburn. What began as a spark on the set of Woman of the Year in 1942 grew into a private, passionate partnership that lasted 26 years. Hepburn, fiercely independent and unapologetically direct, seemed to be Tracy's equal in every way, except in public. They were never seen as a couple in the spotlight. She knew he would never leave his wife, not because of love, but because of guilt and faith. And so, she remained in the wings, sacrificing her own desire for recognition in favor of preserving their bond in secret. To the outside world, Tracy was a man of principles. But to those who looked closer, he was torn between duty and desire, between image and emotion. His heart lived in two places, one bound by vows, the other by truth. Spencer Tracy didn't just lead a double life. He lived a quiet tragedy, one where love was real, but never allowed to be seen. Errol Flynn, the smile that got him into every room and every kind of trouble. Errol Flynn didn't walk, he swaggered. With a sword at his side and a grin that disarmed even the most skeptical hearts, he was the embodiment of adventure, rebellion, and irresistible charm. On screen, he was the daring hero. Off-screen, he lived as if rules were written for other people, and love, for him, was less a commitment than a momentary thrill. Flynn's personal life became as legendary as his roles in Captain Blood and the Adventures of Robin Hood. He wasn't just popular, he was a storm. Women fell for him quickly, and just as quickly were left behind. He married 3 times, but no union could outpace the speed of his desire for freedom and constant flirtation. Infidelity wasn't a scandal in his world, it was a habit. His first wife, Lily Damita, a glamorous French actress, learned this the hard way. Their marriage was a roller coaster of fiery arguments and long, unexplained absences. The charm that had once dazzled her became her undoing. She reportedly hired private detectives, suspecting he wasn't where he claimed to be, and more often than not, she was right. Affairs with actresses, models, and even starlets just beginning their careers weren't secrets so much as an open script everyone in town had read. But what made Flynn different wasn't just the cheating, it was the way he wore it. He laughed off gossip, leaned into his rakish reputation, and seemed to thrive on the edge of scandal. The public was both appalled and enchanted. Errol Flynn didn't hide behind studio-controlled narratives. He lived larger than life, consequences be damned. In the end, he was exactly what his fans imagined, a man who lived for the moment, even if it meant leaving broken hearts in his wake. Humphrey Bogart, the tough guy who fell for the wrong woman at the right time. Humphrey Bogart built a career playing hard-edged loners, men who hid their hearts behind shadows and cigarette smoke. But behind the trench coats and tough talk, Bogart's real-life romance played out like a script torn between film noir and tragic drama. And at the center of it all was a love triangle that defined and divided his life. By the time Bogart met Lauren Bacall on the set of The Have and Have Not, he was already a star and already married. His third wife, Mayo Method, was a stage actress with a temper as fiery as her red hair. Their marriage was infamous in Hollywood circles, known as much for their public arguments as their rare, tender moments. They were nicknamed the Battling Bogarts, and it wasn't just tabloid talk. Friends described their home life as volatile, shouting matches, slammed doors, icy silences. Then came Bacall. She was 19. He was 44. On paper, it shouldn't have worked, but chemistry doesn't read resumes. Their connection was immediate, electric, and undeniable. Bogart tried to resist, torn between loyalty to a failing marriage and the undeniable pull towards someone who saw him, not just as a star, but as a man worth knowing. But resistance didn't last. Their affair began quietly, but couldn't stay hidden for long. The on-set whispers turned into full-blown rumors, and eventually, Mayo confronted him. What followed was a storm of heartbreak, legal filings, and finally freedom. Bogart divorced Method and married Bacall in 1945, beginning what many would later call one of Hollywood's great love stories. But the truth is messier than the legend. For all his cinematic gravitas, Bogart was just another man who strayed, not because he didn't care, but because he found something he couldn't walk away from. Robert Mitchum, the man who couldn't be tied down, even when he was married. Robert Mitchum had the eyes of a man who'd seen too much and cared too little, or at least, that's what the studios wanted you to believe. Cool, distant, and impossible to shake, Mitchum's screen persona was the blueprint for the modern anti-hero. Off-screen, he was equally enigmatic, a man who claimed to despise Hollywood's hypocrisy while indulging in its every temptation, especially when it came to the women drawn to sleepy charm and dangerous edges. He married Dorothy Spence in 1940, long before he was famous. By all accounts, she was loyal, patient, and steadfast, the kind of woman who stayed in the background, raising their children while Mitchum's face lit up marquees around the world. They remained married until his death, which is perhaps the most remarkable part of the story, because along the way, Mitchum gave her every reason not to. The rumors were endless. Co-stars, chorus girls, even complete strangers who happened to be in the right place at the wrong time. Mitchum never courted the press, and he rarely gave anything away. When asked about his private life, he brushed it off with a shrug or a joke. That was his genius, to act as if none of it mattered, as if hearts were things other people had to worry about. But those who knew him, really knew him, saw the contradiction. He loved his wife in his own way, but he couldn't stop chasing the thrill of something new, something fleeting. For Mitchum, monogamy was a nice idea, just not one he ever believed he was built for. In the end, Robert Mitchum wasn't a villain or a victim. He was a man who walked through life on his own terms, even when it meant walking away from the promises he once made. Frank Sinatra, the voice that won hearts and broke a few along the way. Frank Sinatra didn't just sing love songs, he lived them. Every lyric he crooned felt pulled from his own tangled heart, and maybe that's why people believed every word. He made romance sound effortless, eternal. But behind the stage lights and velvet tuxedos was a man who struggled to hold on to the very thing he sang about so convincingly. Sinatra married Nancy Barbato in 1939, before the fame, the screaming fans, and the Rat Pack glamour. She was with him through the lean years, the rise, and the roar of early stardom. But as his name climbed higher, so did the distractions. The whispers of affairs began almost as soon as his records hit the charts. Co-stars, models, showgirls. Sinatra's charm was volcanic, irresistible and unpredictable, and even those closest to him knew he didn't always resist the pull. But it wasn't until Ava Gardner entered the picture that things truly changed. She wasn't just another fling. She was fire to his gasoline, stunning, temperamental, and just as famous. Their affair burned hot and fast, even as he remained married to Nancy. It wasn't just betrayal, it was spectacle. Tabloids couldn't print fast enough. Paparazzi trailed them like shadows. And Nancy, dignified and quiet, finally had enough. Their divorce in 1951 cleared the way for Sinatra and Gardner to marry, but not to find peace. What began as passionate devotion quickly turned into emotional warfare. Their highs were electric, their lows were destructive. Love, in this case, wasn't enough to save them. Frank Sinatra believed in romance, but he struggled with permanence. His voice could melt room, but in his private life, the notes didn't always land. In chasing love's perfection, he often left imperfection behind, and not everyone could wait for the next verse. Desi Arnaz, the man who made America laugh while breaking the heart behind the curtain. Desi Arnaz was a pioneer, a Cuban-born trailblazer who helped shape modern television and redefine what success could look like in Hollywood. On screen, he was electric, quick-witted, magnetic, and utterly charming. As Ricky Ricardo, he danced and joked his way into America's heart. But behind the curtain, while the studio audience laughed, the real story was far more complicated and far more painful. He was married to Lucille Ball, the comedy genius who matched his fire with her own. Together, they built an empire. I Love Lucy wasn't just a show, it was a phenomenon. But as millions tuned in to watch their picture-perfect antics, Lucy was living a private heartbreak. Desi's charisma didn't shut off when the cameras stopped rolling. The clubs, the late nights, the long hours at the studio, they all made room for temptation. And temptation for Desi was rarely turned away. Lucy knew. Everyone did. The stories weren't just rumors, they were patterns. Whispers turned into confirmed sightings, then into confrontations. She tried to look the other way, tried to save the marriage, the show, the image, all at once. They even renewed their vows in a hopeful attempt to start over. But the cracks kept deepening. Eventually, the weight of betrayal proved too heavy. In 1960, Lucy filed for divorce, and the dream unraveled. Yet, in a strange twist of fate, the love between them never fully disappeared. They remained connected, emotionally, even if not romantically, for the rest of their lives. Desi Arnaz was a man split in two, a visionary entertainer and a restless spirit. He gave the world laughter, but at home, he left a legacy of longing. In loving him, Lucille Ball gave us a show. In losing him, she gave us the truth behind the applause. Laurence Olivier, the stage was his kingdom, but love was his greatest performance. Laurence Olivier lived for the spotlight. On stage and screen, he was pure precision, the master of Shakespeare, the aristocrat of British acting, the man whose presence could silence a room. But love, for Olivier, was never as tidy as a script. It was messy, consuming, and impossible to direct. And when it came to his marriage, the drama didn't end with the final curtain. Olivier was married to actress Jill Esmond, a talented performer in her own right, though forever cast in his shadow. Their union began with promise, but soon the distance between their ambitions and their affections became impossible to ignore. Esmond, grounded and reserved, watched as Olivier's fame soared and his heart wandered. Then came Vivien Leigh. She was luminous, intoxicating, and as volatile as she was brilliant. Their chemistry ignited like lightning during their stage collaborations, and soon their affair was no longer a secret whispered in dressing rooms. It was a full-blown scandal. Both were married. Both had careers to protect, but neither could stay away. They carried on in stolen moments, theater tours, hotel rooms, all while maintaining the illusion of control. Olivier eventually divorced Esmond, and he and Leigh married in 1940. But what seemed like the perfect pairing, two titans of the stage, forever entwined, slowly unraveled under the weight of personal demons and professional pressure. Vivien battled her own inner storms, and Olivier, despite his devotion, began to drift again. His betrayal of Jill was the first act of a longer play, one that would cycle through devotion, frustration, guilt, and regret. Laurence Olivier understood the art of transformation better than anyone. But in matters of love, even he couldn't mask the cost of chasing passion over promise. Richard Burton, the man who loved too loud, too fast, and always in the wrong direction. Richard Burton spoke like thunder and lived like lightning. He was a man of big feelings, big gestures, and even bigger mistakes, the kind of actor who could fill a theater with just a whisper, and yet couldn't seem to quiet the chaos in his own heart. He didn't fall in love quietly. He fell like a landslide, breathtaking, reckless, and impossible to stop. When Burton met Elizabeth Taylor on the set of Cleopatra, the world was already watching. He was married to Sybil Williams, a composed and elegant Welsh actress who had weathered the storms of his rising fame. But nothing, not loyalty, not marriage, not public scrutiny, could hold Burton back from what he saw in Taylor. Fire meeting fire. It wasn't just attraction. It was combustion. Their affair was the scandal of the decade. Paparazzi swarmed, headlines exploded, and audiences clung to every detail. Both were married. Both denied nothing. The Vatican even issued a public statement condemning their relationship. And yet, the more the world protested, the closer they seemed to draw. By the time Burton left Sybil, it wasn't just a personal betrayal. It was a declaration of war against convention. He married Taylor in 1964. The world called it a love story, but inside their golden cage, the truth was Messier. Their passion burned hot, often too hot to handle. Fights were legendary, reconciliations dramatic, and the love, as real as it was, couldn't always outpace the damage they did to each other. Still, even after their divorce and remarriage, and divorce again, Burton's heart remained tethered to Taylor. But Sybil? She had long since stepped out of the spotlight, carrying the quiet legacy of a man who broke vows as easily as he spoke sonnets. Richard Burton didn't cheat in the shadows. He did it on the world stage, loud, unapologetic, and unforgettable. Marlon Brando, the rebel who couldn't stay still, not even for love. Marlon Brando didn't just redefine acting, he shattered it. He was raw, unpredictable, magnetic. A storm in a leather jacket, with eyes that carried the weight of a man already haunted by his own myth. But if his screen presence felt untamed, his personal life was even more so. For Brando, love was never about stability. It was about the pursuit, then the escape. He had many relationships, many children, and many regrets. Women fell for him easily, and he moved through them like someone looking for something he never expected to find. Fidelity wasn't a priority. It wasn't even a possibility. Brando was addicted to newness, to intensity, to the drama that begins when a connection is still full of mystery. But the moment it started to feel safe, he drifted. He was married 3 times, and none of those marriages were spared the sting of his infidelity. His second wife, Movita Castaneda, was a serene presence in his life, until she wasn't. Whispers turned into certainty. Affairs with co-stars, models, and women far outside Hollywood circles filled the void. To those close to him, it was no surprise. Brando wasn't a partner. He was a wanderer with a broken compass. He once said, "If there's anything unsettling to the stomach, it's watching actors on television talk about their personal lives." And yet, his own life played out like a tragic screenplay, one where he couldn't help but rewrite the ending again and again. The damage left behind was very real. Fractured families, distant children, and women who remembered the brilliance but bore the cost of his carelessness. Marlon Brando wasn't unlovable. He was unreachable. And for the people who tried to hold him, that was the hardest role of all. Tony Curtis, the pretty face that couldn't hide the restless heart. Tony Curtis looked like he was carved for the screen, striking, smooth, and effortlessly cool. He moved through the golden age of Hollywood with a grin that made directors take notice and audiences fall in love. But beneath the perfect hair, the polished charm, and the rapid fire, it was a man who never quite settled. Not in his fame, not in his work, and certainly not in his marriage. Curtis married Janet Leigh in 1951, a union that seemed plucked straight from a studio dream. 2 impossibly good-looking stars, young and ambitious, perfectly photogenic. They became a tabloid sensation, Hollywood's golden couple. But inside their glamorous frame was something far more fragile. While Leigh sought family and stability, Curtis was still chasing the rush of being wanted, not just by fans, but by anyone who made him feel temporarily alive. On movie sets, the pattern was familiar. If chemistry sparked, Curtis rarely left it unexplored. Co-stars turned into companions, and fleeting connections became well-kept secrets, though not always well-kept enough. Leigh knew. Everyone did. But in that era, divorces were as damaging as scandals, so she held on, hoping things would change, that he would settle into their life together. Instead, the distance grew. Their marriage lasted over a decade, longer than most expected, but eventually the illusions faded. Curtis's heart was always wandering, and Lee was done waiting for it to come home. They divorced in 1962. To the public, Tony Curtis was the handsome rogue, the charming lead, who never took life too seriously. But in his wake were relationships that never found roots, promises left in the dust of red carpets, and a love story with Janet Leigh that might have survived if he hadn't been chasing every shimmer in the corner of his eye. Warren Beatty, the leading man who couldn't say no, and rarely tried to. Warren Beatty didn't just flirt with fame, he seduced it. From the moment he stepped into Hollywood, he carried the dangerous appeal of someone who knew exactly how good-looking he was, and wasn't afraid to use it. The camera adored him, and so did nearly everyone else. He wasn't just a heartthrob, he was a phenomenon, the man who made falling for him feel like gravity. But love for Beatty was a revolving door. He dated, publicly, prolifically, unapologetically. Actresses, models, singers, heiresses, the list is dizzying. To name just a few is to barely scratch the surface. Natalie Wood, Joan Collins, Diane Keaton, Julie Christie, and Carly Simon, who famously wrote, "You're so vain," and many believe it was, at least in part, about him. But through all the headlines and whispers, one truth remained constant. Beatty was rarely, if ever, faithful. He wasn't married during most of these high-profile relationships, but that didn't shield him from emotional wreckage left behind. Promises made one week would unravel the next. Women who imagined they'd be the one soon realized they were just one of many. He made each of them feel special, and that was part of the problem. For Beatty, attention was currency, and he spent it freely. There was no dramatic cheating scandal tied to a wedding vow early on, because for years, he simply avoided vows altogether. But emotional betrayal doesn't always need paperwork. Hearts broke just the same. He didn't hide who he was, but that didn't soften the blow for those who thought they could change him. It wasn't until much later, when he married Annette Bening in 1992, that the world finally saw Beatty commit. But by then, he'd already built a legacy as Hollywood's most famous wanderer, a man who could fall in love in an instant and vanish just as fast. Peter Lawford, the gentleman in the tux, hiding a trail of goodbye notes. Peter Lawford had the kind of charm that slipped into a room before he did. Polished, well-spoken, and devastatingly handsome. He was the English gentleman of the Rat Pack, the man with perfect manners and a scandal just beneath the surface. On the outside, he seemed untouchable. But behind the tailored suits and movie star smile was a man who lived by his impulses, especially when it came to love. In 1954, Lawford married into American royalty, Patricia Kennedy, sister to future President John F. Kennedy. It was more than a marriage, it was an alliance. Hollywood and Washington, screen and power, joined in a dazzling display of status and potential. But while the press marveled at the union, the foundation was already cracking. Lawford had a reputation, and it didn't retire with his wedding ring. Whispers followed him everywhere, affairs with actresses, late-night rendezvous after studio parties, discreet exits from hotel lobbies. His lifestyle never quite aligned with the clean-cut image the Kennedys wanted to maintain. Patricia, raised in a world where appearances mattered more than truth, often looked the other way, but even her silence had limits. As the Rat Pack years rolled on, so did the rumors. The women changed, but the patterns didn't. Lawford never denied much, he didn't need to. His charm disarmed even the most critical eye. But over time, the glimmer faded. The Kennedy family, protective of its image, began to distance themselves. The marriage crumbled, and by 1966, Patricia had had enough. Their divorce was quiet, but the betrayal echoed long after the papers were signed. Peter Lawford lived in the in-between, between elegance and recklessness, love and indulgence, fame and fallout. He wasn't cruel, just careless. A man who never meant to hurt, but never stopped leaving people behind. Mickey Rooney, the boy wonder who grew up fast and left hearts behind even faster. Mickey Rooney was once the most famous boy in America. With his wide grin and boundless energy, he ruled the box office in the 1930s and 40s, becoming the face of youth, hope, and old-school Hollywood optimism. But behind that wholesome image was a man whose personal life would become one of Tinseltown's most turbulent, a whirlwind of marriages, affairs, and the kind of chaos fame never quite prepares you for. He married 8 times, and Ava Gardner was first in line. At just 19, she fell for Rooney's boyish charm and quick wit. But while Gardner entered the union with wide-eyed hope, Rooney brought along a wandering heart. The marriage barely lasted a year. Rumors of infidelity surfaced almost immediately. Ava was devastated, blindsided by a man who seemed incapable of resisting temptation, even when married to one of the most beautiful women in Hollywood. And Ava was only the beginning. Rooney's life was a carousel of romances and restarts. He moved from one relationship to the next with dizzying speed. Co-star, starlets, studio secretaries, no one was off limits. Each new marriage began with passion, but soon collapsed under the weight of his impulsiveness and inability to stay faithful. He wasn't malicious, just constantly chasing the rush of something new. And when the thrill wore off, he moved on. Yet despite the broken vows and mounting headlines, Mickey Rooney never stopped believing in love. He just couldn't hold on to it. His charisma never faded, but the cost of it followed him everywhere, in divorce settlements, fractured families, and hearts left unresolved. In the end, Rooney's life was a contradiction, a legend of innocence who couldn't escape his own appetite for experience. The boy wonder who never really grew out of wanting it all, even when it meant losing what mattered most. As we close the curtain on these 14 old Hollywood legends, it's worth remembering that behind every iconic performance was a human story, complicated, passionate, and sometimes painfully imperfect. These actors shaped the golden age of cinema, but like all of us, they struggled with choices, temptations, and the weight of their own humanity. This isn't about passing judgment, it's about pulling back the velvet rope and looking honestly at the lives behind the legends. Hollywood has always been a land of illusion where appearances are carefully managed and flaws are hidden behind studio polish. Yet it's those very imperfections that make these stories so compelling. They remind us that fame doesn't shield anyone from heartbreak, and even the brightest stars can cast long shadows. If you enjoyed this journey into the more intimate side of Hollywood history, don't forget to give this video a like and subscribe for more deep dives into the lives of cinema's most unforgettable figures. And now we turn it over to you. Who did we miss? Which old Hollywood icon do you think had a story worth telling? Drop their name in the comments and share your thoughts. We read every single one and love hearing your perspectives. Thanks for watching. And until next time, keep your eyes on the stars, but never forget the stories that unfold behind the scenes.